I was reading this article a few days ago, and in the article they mentioned that one of the most feared things people do in their lives that people absolutely can't stand doing is getting up in front of people and public speaking. If you're not a fan of public speaking, it can cause tons of anxiety and tons of fear, and it's something that a lot of people struggle with. Thankfully, I've had the privilege of a couple of times being able to get up and do some public speaking, and so I thought it would be cool for me to go over a few tips and a few things that have helped me out along the way to help you public speak. Tip number one, know your audience. One of the best ways to be prepared is to know the audience that you're going to speak in front of. So do some research before you go to that event. Do some research before you say something in front of them that might be rude. So it's just important to do your research, because doing your research on your audience is going to allow you to say the best things. Say you're speaking in front of a group of religious people. You're going to want to not say curse words. Say you're speaking in a comedy club and you're trying to be funny or something, then maybe that's going to be acceptable. So you have to know the environment, you have to know the audience that you're talking to. The next tip number two, is something that a lot of people struggle with, and the tip that I have that you should follow is to engage with your audience. Nobody wants to hear you rambling about stuff that is not related to the subject, or just presenting the topic or the subject in a very boring, unengaging way. You want to make sure that you're posing things that are going to make the audience think about what you're saying, and you're going to want to be involved. You don't want to just ramble and rant about other different stuff. I notice a lot of college professors, they like to do that sometimes. They'll be talking about one subject and then they'll lead to another, and it has nothing to do with the reason why we're in the class. This is one of the worst ways to speak to people, because it doesn't work and it doesn't let you connect with the audience. Also, use eye contact, gestures, hand movements. You want to make sure that you seem a little bit more animated, because if you're just up there, you're talking like this and it's really stale, it's really boring. Nobody's going to want to hear a single word that you have to say. Tip number three, and it's one of my personal favorites, that is using stories. Stories are a great way to connect with people because it allows them to, be relatable. You have to be relatable when you're speaking to people. You don't want to just be the guy that, is holier than everybody else. You want to make sure that you are able to share some of your own life in whatever you are incorporating and talking about, because that is going to build a deeper connection between you and the audience watching. Another thing I like to use is self-deprecating humor, and sometimes you got to be careful with this one, but in most cases, people think it's funny if you make fun of yourself. So every once in a while, occasionally throw in a jab at yourself, because it's going to make you look humble, and it's just going to be something that is going to add to the excitement of your speech. And tip number four, say you're speaking somewhere, you want to make sure that you stay after the event is done, because you don't want to just give the speech and then run out, because people, they might have some questions for you. They might want your card, they might want to have a follow-up meeting or talk to you in the future. And so it's super important to stick around and stay, even if it's hours after you're done speaking. You got to stay, because you got to network, you got to pass out business cards. It is something that is super important if you're speaking in front of a group of people, because having that one-on-one conversation, that is what they're going to remember you for. They're not going to remember you so much for what you say during the speech. They're going to remember you for the moment that you have one-on-one after that speech. The next thing is super important. I have always heard that people will forget the things that you said, but they will remember the way you make them feel. So you have to keep that in mind. You want to make them feel emotion. You want to make them feel connected when you are speaking. You don't want to just speak about stuff with no emotion, no stories, bland, because it's going to be boring, and most of the time people are going to forget every single word you say. So always think about how your speech or your presentation is going to make the people feel. And last thing, don't read off note cards. This is something I think is silly. If you need some sort of reference for your speech, make sure that you write down bullet points, but never read off of note cards, because if I have a script right here. These videos, I got a whole book full of them. What I do is I write bullet points or short little things that I want to say. I never just come on here and read. Tip number five, this is super important. Once I've heard, I never read exactly what I write down on this thing, because if I did, it would be super boring. Nobody will want to hear it. And a lot of the times, just reading off of stuff and reading off your script or your notes is going to be boring, and people like the spontaneousness. So always keep it spontaneous. So did I miss anything? If I did, if you have a good public speaking tip, comment that tip down below. And with that being said, I'm Robert, this is GentStyle. I'll see you in the next episode.